Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Elemental. Is the latest film from Pixar. I think when you think of Pixar, you think of you're surprised they can do certain things in a mainstream movie. You're surprised they can put you in certain moments. From the opening of Wall-E to everything they were able to do in The Incredibles as well as they were, to that moment in Toy Story 3, to making Ratatouille as compelling as it is. They always put you in different plots and situations that surprise you, or at least the best Pixar movies that aren't Cars do. And then there is this, which is about a love story between fire and water who fall in love because of poor urban planning. And yeah, that is definitely not as exciting as a rat who can help you make French food. I think Pixar for a long time has been accused of, since their amazing 2000s run, has been accused of not living up to their full potential in the past decade. If you look at the 2010s, I think they made way more sequels than originals, and I think we're really starting to see the weakness in the studio, particularly with something like this. Now, that's not to say that Elemental is a bad movie. It's not a bad movie. It's just watching a studio that can take you to the heights of filmmaking and animation do sort of a mid-level kind of movie that almost any other animation studio probably could do storytelling-wise. Maybe not as beautiful as animation, I doubt they could, but it just doesn't feel very special. And it doesn't feel as special as it usually does, or it used to feel with Pixar. And I don't think I fell in love with it as much. And I'm not sure if What If Elements Had Feelings is that interesting of an idea at this point from them. But you could say, well, don't level it against everything else, level it as just a movie itself. And just the movie itself, I think it is fine, but that's sort of the issue. Is you look at animation where it is currently, and you look at Pixar and its legacy, this film feels almost like partly forgettable. I have a hard time remembering parts of it, and I didn't see it very long ago. And I think that is more to the quality of the film and not to, my declining body slowly dying and stuff. Elemental is about a fire being, Ember, who is first generation fire, who moved to Element City. These two fire-ish people, and they have a daughter, Ember, and she's going to start to take over the shop. And on the first day, because she has a fiery temper, because not only she's made of fire, but she's also a woman, so we gotta play into both those things, I guess. And so she explodes with anger, and when she explodes, the pipes burst and water comes through. And who comes through? Because water elements are also a thing in this town that I should explain. Has wind, which are just clouds, earth, which are just like trees and stuff, fire, which is fire, and then water, which is water and stuff. And water comes through the pipes, although it's not supposed to. And who comes through is the city inspector. Her and the city inspector try to figure out why the pipes in Firetown, because they're segregated into different elements, things. And through figuring out why the water is coming through the pipes and figuring out the legislative red tape they have to go through to make sure that the city is planned accordingly to its residents and the poor area is actually taken care of as it should, and they fall in love through that. First, the one thing I really should address is this was actually my son Oscar's first movie in the theaters. There was an all-ages show at Nighthawk Prospect Park, and he got to go. He paid attention for the most part, so he did a good job. And he had a lot of fun running through the seats. Once, he's one, so we'll give him a break there. It looked like a lot of fun to run through a movie aisle when you're that little. So, I can't say I blame him for that. But Oscar, if you're watching this later, in the future, I just wanted to say, I hope you're doing well. I hope I'm still alive and I'm doing okay. I love you. I hope your life's working out for the better. And yes, this was your first movie, and yes, you did a pretty good job. I'm sorry it wasn't a better movie, but I still had a really good time seeing it with you, despite all the things I say in this review. I did have a good time going with you, and it was a lot of fun. So if you're ever wondering that, it was still fun, and I did have a good time. I just am, an animation snoot probably. But I hope you're doing well, and you should text me or however you do that when you see this review, because you probably didn't know this was in here. If you're actually watching this, we'll see. Maybe you're into other stuff. That'd be cool too. Nobody tell them this is in here. It'll totally freak them the fuck out. Easter egg I planted. But regardless of that, I think so. This is Peter Sohn's kind of big auteur statement. He previously made Good Dinosaur, but he was sort of a director for hire, much like how Brad Bird was with Ratatouille. I think he, much like Brad Bird on Ratatouille, which is a similar Pixar situation, he came in, I think he directed, he did a decent enough job. I forget what I said about Good Dinosaur, but I'm sure it was entirely justified. In this, I know he wanted to talk about the immigrant experience. I think that is a really good idea, actually, and I think that's a good reason to make a movie and talk about that. There's certain things about this movie that work really well and actually takes the format that Zootopia has done and so many films do with like the crazy fictional city, like everything from Zootopia to even Luck, which I'm sure Pixar people love me to bring up, or Hop, or so many others that have these like fictional societies that have various rules in them and things like that. But one thing that I think works about this is like the idea that the fire town is definitely the poor one. The city clearly gives less of a shit about it. It basically, in Zootopia, you have these various regions, but there's not an idea of, you sort of get it, but not really, like who is poor, who is richer or something, why are these segregated. In this, it's like there's also a financial reason going on here, which they do play into. And I actually think that was actually really an interesting thing to bring into an animated film, particularly that this is a family film. I think that's actually really cool, and bring that up when a lot of films, especially family films, don't like to do that, and films in general, to be honest with you. I like that part. That was different. But I think a lot of the immigrant experience within this film is so broad. Like, I often wondered, why do that? Like, are we trying to appeal to everyone when clearly this is, for Peter Sohn, a very specific story here, and like it kind of loses its specificity. You know, you sort of get that through it, but you don't fully get it. You seem to be, when you're watching it, more interested in the colors and the idea that, like, you know, fire and water are not easy things to animate whatsoever, and that they clearly had to build new computers to make this film. And as an animation, I think it is like really awe-inspiring what they did here, but it doesn't seem to want to talk about that specificity. And I think, like, when you look at the former Pixar brain trust, when you have like the real dream team of Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird, Lee Ulrich, Pete Docter, who's, you know, obviously still there, John Lasseter, sorry I had to bring him up, but they understood the specificity of the thing that they're actually working on. And I think the thing with this is, and when you're looking at like classic Hollywood, or as long as movies have existed, and you're going to take on something that someone else has done. Zootopia's been out for a long time. It's a very acclaimed film that plays quite a bit in this living room where I'm shooting this, and I'm sure for most of you. But at the same time, you should understand that that's been done before, and you should also understand to talk about a certain specificity to those things, because with Zootopia is taking on those things but being very specific about its format in it. And I feel like a lot of the immigrant stuff was like mixing things together in a weird way, where it's like, I guess you want it to be for everyone, but I think in a lot of ways it sort of felt like kind of fake. Like the whole like bowing thing just didn't, I don't know, maybe that's based on something, but it didn't really feel that way, and that I don't think worked as well, because you're not sure like who are the kind of Irish people, like, not that I want them to be like necessarily like a certain race like in real life, but that felt strange. And like certain things, like how the fireplace has like very spicy food, and it's like, I get it because they're fire, but that's sort of a cliche people say about immigrants and things like that. So that stuff I didn't love, and I wish that had made me fall in love with it. But the animation was really cool. I think the main thing that holds this back, almost the context of this movie, is one of its worst enemies. Because in any other summer, I would say this is some glorious animation and stuff. But dude, I saw Spider-Verse in IMAX. My mind has been blown. And this is like really still very impressive, but it's not like Spider-Verse impressive. I'm sorry, I'm also wearing the shirt, so I look like a total fanboy right now. But it just, Pixar relying on its own Pixar-ness sort of is its own undoing while you're watching this film, because you're like, oh, okay, yeah. And I think what kind of adds to it, what hurts it, is the story, which is like, oh, we have to stop the water from going in here. And it's like, that is, in a sense, sort of interesting. Like, I was paying attention and compelled by it, despite having two kids with me and stuff. I was, but at the same time, like, it doesn't feel as like alive and interesting. You know, the love story between the two voices, Mamadou Athie, I think that's how you say his name, and Leah Lewis was actually pretty good. I didn't get as into it. I did Mamadou Atias. I seen in Archive 81, and I think the last Jurassic World. And the persona I was used to for him was very much quieter, and his voice was bassier and things like that. And then you see him in this, and he's like a totally different guy. Like, it was actually like, did I misread it? Like that, which is actually pretty good, because I don't think either of them are the kind of performances you think of, like, typically how you think of versatility. So I think there's probably more to him as an actor that I'd like to see more of. Yeah, I thought Leah Lewis was good. Wendy McLovin Covey, who's from Reno 911, and Bridesmaids, and I guess the Goldbergs, we've never seen, as well as Catherine O'Hara, were great. Catherine O'Hara is always good. They show up late in the movie, though. I think the voice cast is actually really good. It was interesting they didn't really have stars in it. I thought that was cool. The animation and the story, it's like the love story is the better elements of it, and the animation and the color. I wish I had more time to let this shine on its own, not next to one of the most visually stimulating films I'll probably see. But I also think the story is not too different. I mean, in Zootopia, they're like, oh, let's solve a murder mystery conspiracy thing, and in this movie they're like, let's stop water spillage because we didn't get a team to seal that up. I just don't see how that is anywhere near as compelling. Oh no, they better, they'll go out, I guess, but you should seal that up. And it doesn't really play the same. I understand it still sucks for them, but as a story, it's just really not as compelling as any of those. Because most of the time when you go into these crazy animated worlds, it's like, you better get the key back to the Dragon Master or whatever the stupid thing is. And it's like, oh, the world will end. And in this, it's like, I guess a few shops will have water in them or something. That's not so good. And I get that, if that happened in real life, that would be devastating. And it's not I need the high stakes. It's just I think the combination of this style's been going on for a while. This is not the most compelling thing. This is not Luca or Turning Red. It doesn't feel overly different. This feels very much like the mid-tier, forgettable sort of Pixar stuff. I wish everything with the immigration stuff had been more specific, and why the sitar music, that confused me, because no one I could hear of Indian descent. It became this I do think it did some interesting things with even the infrastructure stuff, but it just wasn't very surprising. It was just oh, cool, you made a studio rom-com, and that's neat, and it's well animated. It didn't make my heart sing or anything like that. It just felt Pixar as a studio is efficient enough to make this kind of bland-ass story into something much more compelling, which is a real art and really amazing, but I just don't see what's so special about this one. This one really just felt like another Pixar. And I think there's certain ways you could say, oh, well, no, this is different, but I think you'd be making a lot of excuses for something that, does have its moments. When she's dancing on the, I guess, crystals or whatever, when they're falling in love, those are pretty interesting, but it just doesn't reach out to me. It doesn't say much to me. And I don't even think if you're an immigrant, it would necessarily say, which I am not, but I don't think it would really say that much. And I've seen other films like Past Lives brings up the immigrant experience, and I hear that is mainly what people talk about with that film. And this, it's we're mainly talking about the animation and how Pixar's fallen apart. And I don't think that's unwarranted after you watch this movie. I think that's the problem. This should be Pixar's falling apart, but that Elemental is pretty good. I think it's a good movie. I think it works as a rom-com. I think they know storytelling well enough. They do try to do things visually other than having them necessarily happen in the story. There's certain things with Ember and making glass that wasn't built very well at all. Not her glass structures, I mean the story, where it's suddenly the water people are oh, that's really good, but it'd been better if throughout the film you'd been building, it seemed like something she loved, but she didn't realize she could maybe even do that for money, or that could take her to a new place, would have been much more interesting. Stuff like that, and the immigrant stuff felt like things that you'd think Pixar would be smarter about. And so as good as the animation is, and as good as I think the storytelling can be compelling for a story that is, you really have to work overtime to make interesting, it just doesn't feel as kind of special. It just feels kind of, oh, that's another Pixar, but it doesn't really pop out. It doesn't make you wrapped up and enriched in the world of it all, everything. It just feels like a kind of interesting sort of riff on this kind of a format. Good for you, I guess, but it just the reason I like Zootopia is because of the relationship between the fox and the bunny, and it was part of a fairly interesting story as well. And I think like having Ember and Wade fall in love is fine, but like the thing they're bouncing off of is, you know, modern infrastructure and something getting flooded, and it's like, oh no, that's sort of boring. I think the film never knows how to escape that, unfortunately. It never knows how it can make itself more interesting, and I think the earlier Pixar films almost demanded you take it seriously, and in this it feels like it almost is taking you for granted. I think in a sense it'll probably work out. People do sort of just watch all the Pixars, and maybe I guess Elemental will always be one of those when you're just watching all the Pixars. But I think it could have been more. I think if like, it almost felt like they should have done more drafts. It almost felt like they should have refined it a little more. I wish it would understand how to give itself enough to be ultimately compelling enough for me to remember it several days later, and not just like, it's sad when you see one of these and you're like, I think I'm definitely going to forget this just because it's not very memorable. There's certain things about it, there's certain lighting, but like, I'm really having to pick and choose, and I don't really want to make excuses for studios. They should honestly be making movies that I can make reasons for liking, and not making excuses for the fact that they released kind of a mid-tier movie, and probably one of towards the lower end of their catalog, that more highlights, you know, what they need to get back to compel me to fall in love with the studio. This kind of made me think I'm just watching another one. I don't know if this is like the first Pixar for most people that'll make them fall in love with the studio. I think this is just a decent time at the movies, and I guess Pixar is still good at doing that. So if you've seen Elemental and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.